All right, this is Between Past and Future. Rajdeep and Ethan Quinones. Today we're going to be talking about what's going on over in Kenosha, Wisconsin, after the shooting of Jacob Blake by Officer Rustin Sheskey. We're going to start off with the release. This was released yesterday. It's the most updated version of a release from the Wisconsin Department of Justice, and I'll just go ahead and read this for everyone. The Wisconsin Department of Justice, Division of Criminal Investigation, is investigating an officer-involved shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin that occurred on the evening of Sunday, August 23rd, 2020. Kenosha Police Department officers were dispatched to a residence in the 2800 block of 40th Street after a female caller reported that her boyfriend was present and was not supposed to be on the premises. They don't go into any more detail about what that means. He's not supposed to be there. So I was thinking maybe a restraining order or something like that, but it says boyfriend, so that's kind of ambiguous. Going on. During the incident, officers attempted to arrest Jacob S. Blake, age 29. Law enforcement deployed a taser to attempt to stop Mr. Blake. However, the taser was not successful in stopping Mr. Blake. Mr. Blake walked around his vehicle, opened the driver's side door, and leaned forward. While holding on to Mr. Blake's shirts, Officer Rustin Sheskey fired his service weapon 7 times. Officer Sheskey fired the weapon into Mr. Blake's back. No other officer fired their weapon. Kenosha Police Department does not have body cameras, therefore the officers were not wearing body cameras. The shooting officer, Kenosha Police Officer Rustin Sheskey, has been a law enforcement officer with Kenosha Police Department for 7 years. During the investigation following the incident, Mr. Blake admitted that he had a knife in his possession. Department of Criminal Investigation agents recovered a knife from the driver's side floorboard of Mr. Blake's vehicle. A search of the vehicle located no additional weapons. Law enforcement immediately provided medical aid to Mr. Blake. Flight for Life transported Mr. Blake to Froedtert Hospital in Milwaukee. Mr. Blake remains at the hospital. Department of Criminal Investigation is leading this investigation and is assisted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, Wisconsin State Patrol, and Kenosha County Sheriff's Office. All involved law enforcement are fully cooperating with DCI during this investigation. The involved officers have been placed on administrative leave. DCI is continuing to review evidence and determine the facts of this incident and will turn over investigative reports to a prosecutor following a complete and thorough investigation. When DCI is the lead investigating agency of a shooting involving a law enforcement officer, DCI aims to provide a report of the incident to the prosecutor within 30 days. The prosecutor then reviews the report and makes a determination about what charges, if any, are appropriate. If the prosecutor determines there is no basis for prosecution of the law enforcement officer, DCI will thereafter make the report available to the public. No additional details are currently available. So that's the official word from the Wisconsin Department of Justice. And one other thing I'd like to add, even though it's not in this, it's been reported in a couple of different news outlets. The Kenosha News talks about it, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, National Review, and BBC News have all noted that Blake was wanted on a warrant for criminal trespass, domestic abuse, and sexual assault currently. So he had 3 different warrants out for his arrest, in addition to the call that was made.
And the police were, what I read, I think it was also in the Kenosha local paper and one of the Milwaukee papers or something like that. The police were aware that there was some kind of warrant associated with someone who might be there. So they weren't told necessarily that Blake has a warrant for this, but that there is a warrant connected with that address and to be on heightened guard, something like that.
Right. There's some sort of dispute going on in the area when the officers arrived. Blake's lawyer claims that Blake was in the process of trying to stop a physical altercation. Some people were fighting, I guess. But there's no report of that from I've just seen his lawyer talk about it. I didn't get too many details besides that.
And the other thing right away is, why was he going into the car and then he got shot 7 times? Shooting someone at that close range 7 times seems especially uh, bad and especially egregious. And that's probably a large part of what's going on here. If it was just one shot fired into his back and he was paralyzed or wasn't dead, I don't think it would have escalated so quickly. Maybe it would have escalated over time, but it seems that definitely a large part of what happened was the number of shots fired. And I don't know what goes on specifically in training, but it could just be that this person has a loose trigger finger and first shot misses or first shot glances off him and he just goes bam, 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 bam.
Right. It is. I can understand though that once the taser had been used and it didn't stop him, I could understand why you would be a little bit itchier with the trigger finger, so to speak. And it's not very common that people go down after one bullet. That's just how it is, especially if you get shot somewhere in the mid range of your body, in your stomach, in the front end, or in the back end. Being shot once very rarely brings a person down. Oh, that humming's back.
Okay, hold on a second. Is that
That's
better?
better. Yeah, that's better. But yeah, very rarely does one bullet usually bring a person down, unless it's shooting them in the leg and they fall over. A fatal shooting, a fatal shot.
Yeah, and going back to the first point about going to the car, it wasn't as if he was on his way to the car and the cops tried to tell him to stop. They were already trying to stop him, and he made a point to go into the car. Let's say the cops didn't shoot him and he drove away, got into the car, shot off. Let's say he doesn't even hit someone, he just drives off safely. He now has 3 children in the back of the car. It's unclear whether or not the police officers knew that these were his children. Maybe they didn't even know there were children in the car, but he could have potentially escalated the situation to a very dangerous level quickly. And when you go into your car like that, maybe it's not common in reality, but in television, all the time you see someone reaches under, a seat or in the glove compartment or something and gets a weapon. Even if that wasn't realistic for the cop to think, it makes sense why they would be afraid of somebody kind of calmly almost going into the car and reaching for something.
Well, I think that's exactly what the officer was worried about, especially since the DCI agents recovered a knife from the driver's side floorboard. So on the floor of the driver's side of the car, which is where, I mean, he opened up the driver's side door and he was sort of lunging in there, right? The officer was holding him from the back of the shirt, and so he was going because of that, but maybe also, there's speculation, but it's like he was being held back, and so his hands and the front end of his body were forward leaning into the car. Um, so, yeah, and if it's a domestic disturbance that you get called on, and there are children in the back of the seat, I don't know what the policy is or anything like that, but it seems logical that you would assume that those children are somehow involved in the domestic dispute.
Yeah, and the backlash to this was very sharp and immediate. And
That night, people started burning stuff down.
yeah, and it didn't if you look at the specific case right here, there isn't a clear law that you see someone breaking, right? So in the case of George Floyd, you see this uh, chokehold move that seems blatantly wrong, right? But the officer shooting a gun like that, I mean, the person's unarmed. Some people are saying officers should never shoot someone unarmed, but it's hard to point to a specific law that you could implement or a rule you could change right now that would prevent this from happening tomorrow in a different city. Let's say there's a small town where no one knows about this incident. The same scenario could play out exactly the same, and I can't think of a specific law that you would change except for maybe a blanket ban on shooting unarmed people. Um, I don't know if that would have great consequences overall. It might reduce the sort of dramatic videos that come out, but besides that, I can't think of anything in this encounter that says, "Oh, we should make a law to prevent officers from doing that from now on."
Right. And at a certain point, we do have to ask, what rights do officers have when it comes to defending themselves? Right? People, the whole defending the police movement is they've they're overlooking the human element of the police department. And if you're dealing with someone who has a maybe they didn't know, but they're being violent and actively resisting arrest in the moment. A taser was used and it didn't work in stopping this person. So you don't necessarily know um, what this person is capable of or what this person is planning on doing. And if an officer has a right to protect themselves, and as far as I can tell, this this was definitely an overreaction from the protester side and the rioters.
And I think there's definitely an argument that if you look at what happens, it doesn't look like a trained officer was de-escalating a situation. It looked like a group of officers who weren't doing a good job at detaining someone and escalated and they shot in a panic. If you want to have police officers that are highly trained and don't panic, you are going to have to spend money on retraining or rehiring police officers. And
Yes.
taking money away, and especially the movement to deride the job, say all cops are bastards. Even if a large percentage of cops are bastards, saying that is completely unproductive because no one's going to want to be a cop ever. Especially if you call people race traitors or make fun of people of color becoming police, which has happened throughout the protests. You're not going to have good people applying to be police. If it's a crappy job that people make fun of and look down upon you for having, I don't think you're going to get a high quality of person applying. And you're going to have people panic. Like, officers definitely have a right to defend themselves, but they also need to understand. I think that they have a duty to try and de escalate first and take more measures and steps than an average citizen would
I
to
wholeheartedly agree. Yeah,
yeah.
I agree with
So
that.
the bar should definitely be very high. But at a certain point, let's say you have somebody pointing a gun at a police officer, or what's happened, especially, it seems what happens often is that there's some sort of scuffle and it becomes a question right away of does this person have his gun? Is the criminal going to get the gun? Because if the criminal who's already gone to the point of resisting the police, if you're resisting the police to the officers, regardless of whether or not it's true, it shows them that you're they're going to have to escalate things. You're not listening to them. You're not a sane, rational person. And if there's any question about them getting a hold of a gun, that means that they could shoot you or other people. And if you try to stop a criminal and he knocks you out and takes your gun and shoots a bunch of people, I don't think that's going to go very well for you. So you have, a definite incentive to stop people. And there's definitely been a few cases where people are running away, and it seems like you could let them run away and catch them later. Like, there's 20 cop cars streaming towards the area. It seems like you could let this guy go and catch him later. But when it gets to the point of somebody having warrants or being known to be dangerous, you then have to question what happens. What's the collateral damage of not stopping them?
Right. And this idea about if we demonize cops, we might not get the best quality of cop. I think that what happened the following night is actually a really good example of that. And that has to do with a 17-year-old named Kyle Rittenhouse. He went to Kenosha from across, he's not from Kenosha. He might have even been from outside of the state. And he was part of a group of armed individuals, and they were patrolling the streets in a pro-cop fashion. They wanted to go out there and support the police. And one of the sheriffs of Kenosha County, David Beth, said that yesterday I had a person call me and say, "Why don't you deputize citizens who have guns to come out and patrol the city of Kenosha?" And he told reporters on Wednesday, and I'm like, "Oh, hell no." Beth continued to go on, saying that if he did deputize someone, they would fall under his guidance and in turn become a liability to me and the county and the state of Wisconsin. And he suspects that this individual, Kyle Rittenhouse, was part of this group that wanted to be deputized. It's not confirmed, but it's speculation from the sheriff who is in the sheriff of Kenosha County. Kyle Rittenhouse came to town armed with some sort of semi-automatic rifle, I believe, and he shot on several people, and he killed 2 people and injured a third. And it seems like, we can get into some various rationales as to why someone would do that. I don't know how useful that will be, but I think this is the future of law enforcement that you're looking at if we continue to demonize cops, and that is a more aggressive police department and a this isn't going to lead to abolition of the police when you have riots and things like that happening afterwards. People are going to be scared, and people are going to want more. They're going to want stronger security forces around them. People don't like it when their neighborhoods get set on fire and when people are walking around killing each other. And Kyle Rittenhouse seems to be the potential future of law enforcement if we don't have actual reform and if we don't start handling the situation with rational, clear thinking rather than emotionally going out into the streets and screaming and, starting up nonsense, starting up rabble rousing and burning stuff down, attacking each other, clashes in the streets.
Well, there's also a couple of things too with this Rittenhouse kid. He was involved in some sort of it's a youth police cadet program, and he has a apparently long social media history of being a fan of the police, a police booster, some might say, and he actually met with police, according to some videos that aren't confirmed, but I looked at them, it looked like he was part of the group that met with police before that and said, oh, we're going to help you out and patrol certain places. And so the idea initially is that these people are like you said, they want to be deputized and be para police forces that defend places. Even if that's their goal and they don't mean to kill people or cause chaos, doing that with a weapon that looks like it came out of a video game is going to lead to chaos. And we saw this happen in the Chaz zone in Seattle. It happened in Georgia where you had a black militant group arm themselves and then somebody ended up shooting one of their fellow marchers by accident. When you use these type of weapons that are intended to look like they come from video games or are used on a battlefield, it immediately escalates things. It raises tensions. And this is a 17-year-old kid. And when I watched the video, it looked like you had guerrilla warfare going on in the streets of the U.S. Somebody's like tossing it was like a Pepsi bottle in a bag. They're trying to toss it at this guy. And if you watch the initial part of the video, the person who ends up getting shot, he's charging at this kid who has an assault weapon. And the kid ends up shooting him to death, shoots him, stops, looks at the body, and then goes into like a crouch and sprints off, exactly like he's in, a video game. And then 2 more people attack him, and he shoots them and kills another one, and like I guess severely injured someone's arm. And I don't know exactly what type of ammunition, but it looked like it was something similar to an AR-15 with I don't know, Raj. What's the next step up from 22? I don't know what type of ammunition you would use in there, but at a close range, a large bullet like that to your arm would cause quite a bit of damage. It's not like, a handgun from 20 yards or 30 yards that's going to go through you or get stuck in your leg. This is going to cause serious damage. So yeah, it really looks like this is like a kid hopped up on video game fantasies. But then again, when you look at what's going on and what you've seen from all the protests and riots and looting, it looks like Grand Theft Auto out there. So even though what he did was horrible, I'm not terribly surprised. And a lot of people weren't responsible in this situation. The police who encouraged him, a culture where you give kids assault weapons and train them at a young age. And, he wasn't just walking around with a 22 rifle or a shotgun saying, get off my lawn. He had rubber gloves on and he looked like he was out there to enforce the law as a 17-year-old kid with a gun. I don't know, it's bizarre.
Yeah, it's definitely very strange. I don't know exactly what kind of gun he was using or the type of ammunition, but it definitely seemed larger than 22 caliber.
Yeah,
Um,
and
so maybe we should talk about some of the fallout outside of Kenosha, besides the death and destruction that occurred there. Over in Oakland, they started rioting in solidarity, I guess, and they set fire to um, the one of the courthouses there. And they're smashing windows all the way in Oakland. Um, you know, it's thousands of miles away, and so this is causing people to, just like the George Floyd incident, it's causing people to um, activate and take to the streets around the country, even though the George Floyd case seemed much more brutal in a sense, but also it wasn't as clear that George Floyd was resisting arrest or anything like that. Whereas in this case, it was they have someone with a violent criminal history actively resisting arrest. I'm not saying that warrants him being shot 7 times in the back, resulting in him being paralyzed from the waist down, but there is it's definitely a different circumstance than the George Floyd incident. And Ethan, maybe you'd like to tell us about what's happening in the um, larger cultural landscape with sports and all that stuff.
well, so the NBA is currently they're playing their delayed playoffs in this bubble. So all of the players are trapped in the hotel, and they're confined to this. They're not supposed to leave except for special circumstances for the corona restrictions, etc. And before this even started, there was some talk about whether or not they should play in the light of recent events and whether it would overshadow stuff that happened with Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. And there was a couple players who there was a couple players who weren't going to play in the season who were for it. There was some players who were, but it fizzled out pretty quickly, and they met and played. So then, when this happened on Wednesday, the Bucks refused to play. They didn't show up. So the Magic are the Milwaukee Bucks, so they're from Wisconsin. They're supposed to play the Orlando Magic, and they just don't show up. And so when a team doesn't show up like that, the other team has the option to accept the forfeit, or I guess there's another avenue where you can refuse to accept the forfeit and force the game to be played. So I guess a different example might be a team was on a bus that got into an accident, doesn't show up. The other team says, all right, we're not going to take the forfeit. We'll allow the game to be replayed out of kindness. So the other team decides not to play either, and this sets off a reaction where the other teams end up not playing. And as of now, they're not playing today, and they're scheduled to play tomorrow, but the word is that they're going to play on Friday or Saturday. The MLB also had several games canceled, including the Milwaukee Brewers on Wednesday decided not to play. But as of today, they're playing a doubleheader. So after one day of not playing, they went back. And when you look at the strike or boycott or refusal to play, there isn't a strong demand going on. There isn't a list of, hey, you need to do this. What exactly they want besides an end to police brutality and systematic racism, which I don't think anybody has the power to do. And for the past part of what people are saying, what the media has been saying is, this could be the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of coverage and people, really finally seeing the light about the reality of American racism and police brutality. And there's even a tennis player who briefly refused to play. Um, Her name Naomi Osaka. She was supposed to play in some semifinal at the Masters and didn't end up playing the first. Or I think she said she wasn't going to play and then decided she was going to play, so she didn't actually miss any playing time. But she went so far as to say that there was a genocide of Black people going on in America, and I don't remember off the top of my head. I could look it up what LeBron James's statement was, but it was something similarly similarly inflammatory. And what people are saying is a problem. Uh, doesn't seem like how they're talking about reality doesn't seem to be reflective of what's actually going on. So, regardless of how bad any individual circumstance is, saying that there's a genocide going on is absolutely comical. It
Well,
just,
it's just
there's no
inaccurate.
reality.
Yeah. It's like we want to talk about a genocide, we can go ahead and look over at China and see what the Chinese Communist Party is doing to the Uyghur people. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people being taken from their home and being shipped off away to slave labor camps, being killed, missing. That constitutes something more like a genocide. What happened in Rwanda, where you have um, one tribe of people actively killing and butchering another tribe of people in the streets, you know, okay, I can see that as a genocide. But the fact that um, if you're going to say that there's a genocide of black people happening in the United States, and when you look at the police numbers, the number of people killed by the police in this country is about 1,000 people a year, and it's been pretty much that about 1,000 people a year since I think the mid '90s or so, maybe late '90s. And not all those people are black. I think maybe even only a half, maybe even less than half of those people are black. And so to say that a genocide is occurring when it's not, I think not only is it um, a misapprehension of the facts or reality, it also hurts the case of actual genocides happening in the world and potential things that could happen in this country. You know, you don't want a boy who cries wolf situation over here, where you're saying that the bad thing is happening, bad thing is happening. Okay, maybe something bad is happening, but it's not the bad thing you think it is. And when the actual bad thing happens, you've lost a lot of credibility with most people. And I think most Americans are not in support of these riots. They don't want people to die innocently. They don't want people um, to be injured by the police out on the streets. People want actual justice to be carried out by the criminal justice system. And you know, it definitely there's always room for reform and improvement. And I think that there's two bills right now. The House passed a George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2020. The House passed it. It has not passed in the Senate, and in the Senate they introduced a bill, HR 7120, and that is called that's also the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and that was sent to the Senate. But because everyone's on vacation for months now, this got introduced back in June. It still hasn't passed in the Senate, even though they've gone away and come back several times. So, and these are pretty common sense uh, and reasonable reforms that I think most Americans could get behind. But the longer and longer incidents like these happen, and where the response of a minority of people is to go out and protest, which devolves into violent rioting and insurrection, um, it's going to lose more and more support as time goes on, and this keeps happening. And I don't think
I,
anyone really wants that.
and I think when you look at there's a couple, like for example, New York City has become over the past 20 years uh, a good example of a major police department in America. I wouldn't say it's an exemplar or it's some sort of paragon of virtue or perfect, but the number of shootings and the complaints about police brutality and the number of people arrested and the number of people in jail have all gone down. And there's people who attribute a lot of it to uh, cracking down against homelessness unfairly, which may be true, and there may be some measures that superficially reduce crime, but overall, people seem to be happier with policing and how it's going on. And how this happened was not sustained protest against the police, but actually the opposite is sort of gradual and very, very gradual reform that take like so for example, looking at how many people are shot by the police and what are the circumstances. It turned out that a lot of shootings happened when somebody was fleeing in a vehicle. And when the police are trying to shoot someone in a vehicle, it usually does not, end with them shooting some guy in the shoulder. He swerves off to the curb, and everyone goes home happy. It usually results in chaos and somebody dying unnecessarily. So they banned this. After they banned this, it turns out the number of people being shot by the police went down. And there aren't very many in the specific incidences like Kenosha or in uh, Minnesota, in Minneapolis, when it first took off. There aren't very many specific demands being made, and this most recent time, it seemed to be kind of hijacked by radical people who are largely college educated, upper middle class, saying defund the police, and that's the exact opposite of how things get fixed. And I don't know. It seems like there's definitely a place for protest, but when it becomes ongoing and when the majority of the media, sports teams, uh, musicians, artists, et cetera, all on your side, you need to start thinking about what to actually do. If they said we're refusing to play until Congress comes back and passes this bill, that might actually work. Saying that
Right.
we're gonna, not play the game today and put up a real big stink, and then go back and play a couple of days later, you've done a very, very dramatic thing. Somebody was saying that this is the most powerful protest ever by a U.S. sports team. Uh, okay, yeah, I agree with that, but to what end? It doesn't actually appear that getting athletes on the side of a cause does much when you've already built up the numbers you need. So if you've gotten a large group of society on your side, continuing to protest will not help things. You're going to have to, people who are out there invested in getting numbers on the street, they're going to have to say something more radical to keep people interested over 60, 70, 80 days. So you go from a situation where, okay, now a lot of people who were previously against police reform or, really didn't care too much about it, they're on our side. What do we do now? People don't really have a firm idea. They just seem to either move on to the next issue or continue to rail against abstract concepts of systematic racism. And then it leads to situations like this, where when there is some sort of tragic incident that happens, people are primed to just protest harder and harder. And you see, that's why the athletes protested. The belief is that if you get more people on your side, and if influential people in society speak out, that will create change. And it doesn't actually appear that there's such a one-to-one relationship. It actually seems to me that if you got a small number of Republicans to vote against Trump, that would do a lot more than getting another million or 100,000 liberals to tweet something.
Yeah, I think we need different people making demands rather than the nonprofit organization Black Lives Matter, because some of the things that they want and their demands are most people aren't going to go for, like disrupting the nuclear family. I
I
don't
don't.
think.
I think also though that's regardless of the National Black Lives Matter organization, and there's also several now that have cropped up. You have small groups attempting to take action in local areas, and they have equally odd beliefs because they're just going on Instagram. There's an article, I can't remember what site it was on, but they're talking about the proliferation of these Instagram slideshows. Have you seen them?
Hmm. I'm familiar with the format, but I haven't seen any specific ones.
So they blew up recently, and sometimes it'll be pages just devoted to producing these things. And the typical format is a provocative statement and then simple bullet points that claim to explain complicated topics to someone who should already know what's going on. So it takes the tone of, wow, you still don't understand police brutality? Here's a few things that will help you understand. And then there'll be very decontextualized, stark statistics. Like, did you know that one of the leading causes of death in young black people is uh, murder? And this proves systematic racism is true. Okay, that may be very well true. That may actually be completely true. That's not the point here. The point is that they're trying to get people to believe complex things simply through repeating cliches and
Right.
simple statistics that people don't actually understand. So when you get around to dealing with something Like, why are black people disproportionately uh, shot and killed by the police? The response is systematic racism, and these slideshows proliferate that sort of simplistic thinking, and that's actually, I think, hurts change and hurts reform uh, a lot, because you start to think of these things as in simplistic ways, and you need simplistic answers that happen overnight. It's such an outrage, and the reason it's such an outrage is partially because it's just people don't care. And now that you've found out this fact that you took on belief, basically, because it also turns out there's a very low rate of people who actually go to the end of the slideshow, and the amount of people who share to the amount of people who actually go through the slideshow is very, very low too. So a lot of people are seeing a couple decontextualized statistics that may or may not be true, sharing this, and then believing the problem is, wow, if everyone read this slideshow, they would understand.
Right, and the danger with reducing complex things like this into little sound bites is the danger of the thought terminating cliche. Arendt talks about something similar, but that particular phraseology comes from a man named R.J. Lifton, who wrote a book called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. And that's where he was doing a study of quote unquote brainwashing in China underneath the Chinese Communist Party in the 60s, late 50s and 60s. And his
I
definition
think
of,
that's.
I was just going to read his definition real quick.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
The language of a totalist environment is characterized by the thought terminating cliche. The most far reaching and complex of human problems are compressed into brief, highly reductive, definitive sounding phrases, easily memorized and easily expressed. They become the start and finish of any ideological analysis. And so it stops debate, it stops conversation, and it leads to people acting without thinking, which is a real problem. And it allows people's actions to be sort of guided by whatever ideology is being enforced.
And so if you look at, there's a story I'm going to pull up in a second. I didn't want to talk about it necessarily because it's still, there's still unclear if what's actually going to happen. But I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of how power in the United States works. And part of this is because of very real uh, income inequality that's emerged, and untold or untoward power that rich people have in society. And so there's a belief that rich people and celebrities are as powerful, and sports teams owners are as powerful as people in the government. And to some degree, that is true. They can influence laws and policy. But at the end of the day, the government is very, very powerful, and who's in office is immensely powerful. So uh, there's a reporter, Wojnarowski. I don't know how to say his name. Wojnarowski. Wisnowski. I'm not sure, but the Bucks were on a conference call with the Attorney General and Lieutenant Governor of Wisconsin. They are trying to form some sort of action group that will help out with police brutality or black people or racism in some sort of combination in basically the Rust Belt states. And part of this, seems like a good idea, right? They're using their power for good, right? To try to actually affect change. But it also is, in a way, allowing a small group of people to influence the government. And I don't think that these people have necessarily figured out a problem, or more so than they have started believing in a series of thought ending cliches. And so these cliches may correspond with something that's fairly accurate to reality. But if you're just taking action based on a belief in a very simplistic slogan you've memorized, that could very easily shift, and you can end up believing something horribly racist. I think this is partially how a situation like Nick Cannon happens. We talked about previously, where Nick Cannon said these horrible anti-Semitic things. Those sort of things are boiled down into thought-ending cliches and put on the internet in the guise of some sort of black power thing. And it seems that some people read them on the internet and believe them, and like Nick Cannon, promote them. And so if Nick Cannon were to do this and talk to the governor of some state and say, you know, I have a big problem with the Jews and I want to take action against them, that would be horrible. Um, so
To
I
say
don't
the
know.
least.
Yeah, and there's definitely been a Republican backlash to, like if you remember the Colin Kaepernick thing, some people would say, "Oh, just shut up and dribble," or "just shut up and play ball." I don't think that's necessarily fair. I don't think that because you're an athlete, or even just because you're rich or famous, you don't get to have a say or shouldn't be able to use your power or influence. But, uh, you know, if you're a professional athlete, that does not necessarily say anything about your intelligence. And there's definitely a lot of very intelligent athletes, but it seems quite often that, you know, why is it that nurses get paid 40 to $60,000 a year and they don't get very much say in the government, but someone who plays basketball can get paid millions of dollars a year and then get more say in the government? That doesn't seem too fair. It doesn't seem very democratic, and I think that's partially what leads to a backlash against poor white people and poor white people. The poor white people say, "Hey, look, these rich people, they're talking about oppression a lot, and they don't seem very oppressed." And you know, where I'm from, I don't see very. I'm not. A lot of people don't in America. A lot of people don't know very many black people or live near them, so they say, "Oh, you know, I don't see any police brutality." And then there's a video like this Blake guy, and it's easy to dismiss because they can just say, "Oh, well, why didn't he just surrender?" And it leads to a backlash. So even though in a small way they might try to fix a law or you know, get more people on the side of ending police brutality, you could very well see an electoral backlash that erases all the changes people have been trying to make.
Definitely. Anything else, or I think that pretty much
Um,
covers a good chunk of this stuff.
yeah, I had a couple more interesting. Um,
I just want to give a quick little geography of where Kenosha is because I didn't really know. It's about 45 minutes south of Milwaukee and about an hour and a half north of Chicago. So it's in between two very like big metropolitan areas.
so that also probably drew in quite a lot of people from outside very quickly.
Yeah, the hmm, written. I'm forgetting his full name. He's from Illinois, so he came from the neighboring state. It's right there on the border. It's very close. It's I don't know. The city limits probably end where the the southern border of Wisconsin. It looks like.
Yeah, that's why it can be sometimes misleading, even when you talk about from. Let's say it's in Kenosha. Let's say you say from Kenosha or non from Kenosha. Well, there could very well be a township right outside. So you're not from there, but you work there, you own a business there, or all your friends live there, or you're born there, or your family's from there, etc. And if you're talking about somewhere close to a state boundary, crossing state lines to attend a protest or to carry out militia stuff, it sounds bad. But if you look at somewhere being 10 minutes from the state line, you know, that's kind of just a scare tactic, and it's used
Yeah,
by the left and the right. On the other hand, if you're driving from Illinois to Oakland and you have a bunch of Molotov cocktails, no matter which side you're on, that definitely seems to be wrong, and you should not do that.
yeah, and from the George Floyd protest, there's still, or from the aftermath of the George Floyd stuff, Portland is still on fire. So that doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. And National Guard is going to be deployed in Kenosha. I think they were deployed yesterday. Rioting and stuff was a lot calmer last night, and I think they're sending an additional. I think there's something like 200 troops there, which isn't a lot, but Kenosha isn't that large of a city.
And somewhat relatedly, the 538 put out this odd graphic. I don't know if you saw this, but it's shaped like a squiggle. Typically, when you look at the Electoral College, it's a map, and it's oftentimes blue and red. Sometimes there'll be gray areas. Sometimes there'll be light blue and light red to suggest battleground states. This is none of that. It's like a long snake squiggle broken into segments, and the size of the segment correlates with the amount of electoral votes, and then the distance from the center correlates with the likelihood to either side. It's a very odd
Okay, yeah,
graphic.
it is an odd graph.
As
I
soon
found
as
it
I
though.
Yeah, as soon as I saw this, I was like, why would they choose to distill information like this? But I saw
It makes sense. It just takes getting used to, I guess.
I don't know. It seems like someone was just getting fancy with their graphic design skills. Like, what was wrong with the map? Um, but anyway, someone drew a couple lines on this graph, and there's a line going to Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan, and it says riots. Minnesota and Michigan are both predicted for Biden. Minnesota less strongly so, and Wisconsin's right in the middle. If Trump were to win the states that he's more likely to win right now, and win Minnesota and Wisconsin or Michigan and Wisconsin, he would win the election probably. And so it goes beyond just some people say, oh, it's people who are bootlickers who support the police, or you just don't understand what's going on. You don't understand racism. This can't go on, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this could very well tip an election. Ongoing violence in cities that requires troop deployment, National Guard deployment, could be enough to sway people to vote for Trump.
I think it very much will.
Don Lemon and CNN said something to the effect of, "You're seeing it show up in the polling numbers now." This is not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, when Don Lemon starts saying that maybe the rioters need to reconsider what they're doing, then that guy's.
I don't think he says some. I think he says some not so careful things sometimes. I don't think he's actually very radical at all.
No, I don't think he is either. But he's very much someone who moves along with sort of the cultural tide.
Yeah, he wasn't telling people to pull up their pants and go home by any means. But no. I do remember when Don Lemon, I don't know if it was when he first started at CNN, but when he was younger and I first started seeing him, he was kind of awkward and wasn't really that good. And he did definitely turn into a very sharp broadcaster. So it seems like CNN's investment paid off. But there's another story I had. Kim Jong-un is apparently, there's another set of rumors saying that he's in a coma, that his appearances in public have been faked, and that his sister is going to take over at some point.
Wait, who is this?
I can't remember her. I always forget her name. But
wait, who's in a coma?
Oh, Kim Jong-un.
Oh, yeah. I saw some stuff about the body double stuff going on.
Yeah, so it's Kim Yo-jong is the sister who's supposed to take power. But Kim Jong-un there was rumors a while ago, and then they were apparently quashed, and now the same rumors have circulated. And it's also a tactic of North Korea and most totalitarian states to purposefully misinform people so as to keep an air of mystery and prevent people from understanding the inner workings of the party and the government. So I would say you should definitely take it with a grain of salt, but it's also something to look at, because let's say that something drastic happens in North Korea and it goes very, very well for Trump, at least ostensibly. That could give him a small boost after dealing with this Israeli treaty deal, and also if something else happened drastic. I don't know. Things are looking a little crazy right now.
Yep. All right. That's it for this week.
All right. Sounds good.
Like we came from outer space, but Betty knows I waited for the alien, okay? Chalk it up to destiny, the rest of me's you, like a pretty little rabbit chilling on the moon. I won't break the arcade game before the flash that makes the black heart taste the lash. I won't disclose the future except for what I know. Tell the radio and television to tell the show. I saw the alien, okay. I saw the peace sign, November break day. rising love and energy. Drums to space, you know this is the place. Our heart and soul has saved the human race. Could it be that we truly know the score? 'Cause my alien friends say we ended the war. A bloody battle, an interstellar fight. Somehow we did it, victory of the light. But I won't break the arcade game before the flash that makes the black heart taste a lash. I won't disclose the future except for what I know, till the radio and television do tell the show. I saw the alien, okay, okay. I saw the peace sign, remember break of day. I saw the alien, okay, okay. Shining in the sky, November break of day. The peace sign, November break of day. I saw the alien, okay, okay. Shining in the sky, November break of day. I saw the alien, okay, okay. I saw the peace sign too, okay.